ya, at ya. Tell you what's master, coming at ya, coming at ya. Rhyme style disaster, coming at ya, at ya.
Hey everyone, welcome to Outspoken. I am your host, Nigel Ashford. Thank you, guests, everyone, for joining us for another week of an incredible episode. Today, we are doing an episode on my life with HIV. We are venturing in the HIV community from the lives and the stories of two individuals, one being Dyer and one being Roman Blk. One person who went through HIV just like everybody else, was either through sexual through having sex with their boyfriends and having sex with someone who they didn't know had HIV and finding out that they're positive and being diagnosed. And then we also have somebody from the other community who knew that the person that they were having sex was HIV positive and went through another venue in another way. So we're going to venture into both pathways, and I'm really excited. But for us to have an understanding, I don't have any type of expertise in this, so I had to bring on a little bit of help, and that was with Dr. David Malebranche. Dr. Malebranche, he is an advocate. He is an internal medicine physician. He has done so much work within the HIV community. It is crazy. He's an author as well. He is just very well known, and he's leading the whole thing with, like, he's doing a lot in our community, and he's leading the way, and he's just been such an example, and I'm glad he said yes to this. So joining us as a co-host / guest is Dr. David Malebranche. Welcome, Dr. Malebranche. Okay, so are we doing Dr. Malebranche? Are we doing David? Are we doing the Dr. David Malebranche? How are we addressing you? Because I know all those years in school, you want to be, you know what I'm saying, known for, have that DR for a reason. But I also have those people who are like, you know what? I don't care. I'm David.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to be acknowledged. However, I'm not that formal with it. Unless you're a patient of mine, it really, like, it's not an official title that I have to, hold on to, or that you have to show me respect with. But I appreciate when people do. But for this purpose, I'm coming in as David with some expertise in the field. So yeah, David is just fine.
Thank you, David. Thank you. I was laughing when we were getting the show started, David. It was almost like a little mini reunion of you connecting with old friends or people who you knew in the spaces of this advocacy work or dealing with HIV prevention. So I thought that was really dope that the community is really connected.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens when you've been in the game for like 20 years, right? So when you do the work for 20 years, you get to know a lot of people. And, Terry, who you're going to have on the show, and Brandon, who I've known before, Roman, I'm just meeting for the first time. So, these are all warriors and activists and advocates in the field. And so, I've known Brandon and Terry for a little while. So it's been great to be involved with them. And as soon as you told me about the show and then who was going to be on, I couldn't say no, because you had an all-star cast.
Thank you. And we did have Brandon Kennedy joining us, but his flight got delayed, and he was on the flight. He even went and got the Wi-Fi for the flight so he can join the show. He was a huge soldier in this, but the Wi-Fi was just a little sketchy. So we were like, darn. But Brandon's going to come on the show on another episode. We're excited to have him on for the future. But tonight, David is going to be my co-host, and we're happy that me and David were going to rock it out together.
Fair enough. Yeah, and I wore the scrubs. I'm not wearing the scrubs because I'm coming in official capacity. I actually got out of clinic real late today. And wow. I only had time to come home, cook myself some chicken, eat it, and then come on here. So I just didn't have time to change. So I apologize about that.
No, David, I'm just glad you're here, man. I'm checking. You could have showed up in a white beater and some drawers.
Next time I will. Next time I will.
So, David, what drove you to your interest of the educational research and advocacy of HIV prevention, and what made you want to stay in it so long and really devote your craft around it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Generation Xer, so kind of growing up in my late teenage years, HIV was just coming on the scene. And so I wasn't of the generation, like a lot of the baby boomers had a lot of people around them who were dying. Mm-hmm. I was just starting to come into my own sexually as regards to my sexual identity. And then as soon as I started med school and started working, I did my 3rd and 4th years at Emory University in Grady Hospital. And so that was the mid 90s. And I started seeing a lot of patients who were living with HIV. And to be honest with you, I think the thing that got me really interested in it was, one, I was seeing friends and acquaintances that I knew who were contracting HIV. So it was coming close to me personally. And then plus I was seeing a lot of nurses and doctors and other medical staff always treating people living with HIV like shit. And I just said to myself, if I was going to go into a field, that would be it. And I could do it better than them. So that's what kind of got me inspired. And then as soon as I got into, I started my role with academia with Emory University, it was just, I wanted to do research on us. I wanted to do research on Black same gender loving men and HIV. And that was in the early 2000s, like 2000, 2001, when a lot of people weren't talking about us, when the racial inequities were still there. It's a lot different now because there's a lot more attention paid to it. But when I started, like, I had mentors like John Peterson, Greg Millett, a wonderful colleague who works for AMFAR. And I mean, we just kind of like were laying the groundwork and trying to, do the best work we could.
Gotcha. So in your recent research, David, who is now leading with the highest demographic in being diagnosed as positive with HIV?
Yeah, it's probably going to be Black gay men. Obviously, that's always been the case for a number of years now, but particularly between the ages of you could say 18 to 29. Some places will say 24 to 35, depending on what statistics you look at. But to this date, 3/4 of the new infections happen among men who have sex with men, and the majority of those happen among Black and Latin MSM, men who have sex with men. So, that's kind of what we're seeing. There's still a racial inequity with that. And, only about 20% are related to heterosexual contact. And the majority of those happen among Black heterosexual women.
Gotcha. So where do Black women fall? Because I hear they are one of the top as well. And people couldn't believe that when that research first hit the stream.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have the highest rates by far. And with just sheer numbers, as far as new cases, they can't compare to the groups of men who have sex with men. I will say also, too, if you look compared to the percentage of the population they represent and how many of the new HIV cases, you have to recognize that trans women are being impacted disproportionately, and particularly Black trans women. So we have to really focus our attention on us within the Black community, regardless of your, gender identity, sexual orientation. It's all of us that are being impacted by this virus.
Would you say Black trans women were second in line?
No, I would say in society, people don't give Black trans women the respect they deserve. That's for damn sure. But with regards to actual rates per 100,000 population or per capita, Black trans women have a higher proportion of rates compared to their population than even Black gay men. So, and they tend to be more ignored because of society and because of transphobia and because people are just crazy and, judgmental and discriminatory. So we really need to focus our attention on Black trans women as well, because they really have a high rate of new HIV cases in our community.
Oh, wow. So with our generation, I'm a millennial. Mm-hmm. So with our generation and generational Z really coming up, we have PrEP. They're even now doing the they're working on the injection where you don't even have to take the pill every day soon.
Right.
So with that, with the combination of condoms, are we seeing a decrease in people receiving HIV?
Overall, you're seeing like an overall decrease in numbers that we've seen. It's kind of like a plateau and then a little bit of a decrease. But again, it's kind of, those are national numbers. You have to look at specific areas, rural versus urban, different cities, different zip codes. And when you start to kind of parse things out, that's where you see that there are pockets where the epidemic is not really dying, where the epidemic is still kind of being continued. So it's just one of those things that, you know, you can't just take the national numbers and be like, oh, the rates are going down. Great. It's not that case, because that's not the case with all of us. And I think, you know, you mentioned PrEP, and injectable PrEP will probably be available within the next 6 months to a year. Mm-hmm. Latest by probably early 2022. But there are injectable treatments for people living with HIV. And people forget, they talk about PrEP and condoms, but remember that treatment is prevention. So if you're living with HIV, you're on your medications, you're undetectable, your risk of transmitting HIV to your partner if they're HIV negative is essentially zero. And I even had a couple, a cis heterosexual couple in my office today, where the male partner is HIV negative, the female partner is living with HIV and undetectable. And I was talking to them and I said, you know about undetectable is untransmittable, because they were talking about we were talking about condoms and PrEP. And I said, do y'all know you could have sex without condoms? And they were both like, oh yeah, we do all the time. And dude was like, he said flat out, he was like, we've been having sex without condoms for 8 years and I'm still negative to this day. And he's not on PrEP. So again, what I tell a lot of people is that we have condoms, we have PrEP, we have treatment as prevention. You can use any combination of those things. The best thing that works for you and your sexual partners, you get to choose with that. And then when we have things coming down the pipeline, like injectables, we have, you know, PrEP that could last like 6 months, pills that will prevent HIV transmission from 6 months to a year. You have implants, you have transdermal, you have gels that you can put in the vagina and the rectum. There's a lot that the science is going on. All that we're waiting on right now is a cure. But as far as prevention is concerned, and pre-exposure prophylaxis or PrEP is concerned, we're going to have a lot more options as the years go along.
That is amazing. So one thing about it, David, we are going to hear from two individuals who both have HIV, and they have very interesting stories to tell. Again, guys, David is here to assist me and really give his knowledge of what he knows about the virus and about people dealing with HIV. Because like I said, I have no background, and I'm just going to need a little help from a friend. So first joining of our guest is author Terry Dyer. Terry wrote an incredible book about his life, Letters to a Little Black Boy, and it was truly amazing. You saw yourself at least in one chapter, and you saw truth and you saw vulnerability. Terry was on my Outspoken book club last year, and he is no stranger to the show, and it was just truly amazing. And when I was about to do this topic, I was like, oh my gosh, I know anybody else better than Terry, especially in the detail he went in telling him stories. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Terry Dyer. Welcome, Terry. Terry, you're on mute. We can't hear. We see the lips moving.
I was like, wait, that's not me.
Somebody muted your ass.
We don't need to hear from him.
How have you been, Terry? Last time you were on the show, it was I think it was September.
Yes.
It was September. Long. You were my first Outspoken book club. You were the first person I interviewed about books.
Yes. We had a great, impactful conversation last September. I definitely remember that. And we had some technical difficulties, but we certainly worked through that and kept on digging deeper and deeper in that conversation. So Again, thanks for having me back. I'm super excited to be here. Excited to see my brother in prevention world, Mr. David Malebranche. Good to see you too.
It's wonderful to see Terry. That made me smile tonight.
We won't tell people how long ago we go back, but
oh, please do.
No,
please do.
We still look young and fabulous, honey. All right.
So, Terry, one thing that I just love, and I was telling David, this space for HIV prevention and people talking about going through HIV and telling their stories, that space is well connected. I was talking to different people who I was interested in doing the show. Somebody knew somebody who was coming on.
Absolutely.
And then behind the scenes, it was like a reunion. Like everybody was in this whole friends.
You know, there's a lot of us, but again, so few of us that works in this space, especially with communities of color. So it's always nice when we can have these types of reunions and get together and fellowship and laugh about what we used to do back in the day, you know.
So Terry, again, the reason why we brought you here and you as one of our guests is the fact that you are HIV positive. And we want to just say, again, thank you for coming on and telling your story and for being vulnerable with us and just giving and making this show a space for other people to hear and have some type of understanding and feel seen.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. I'm, again, just as I talk about with the book and everything else that I've done since the book has been published, it is incredibly important that we continue to have these types of conversations because that's how we get rid of the stigma. That's how we get rid of the shame and everything that comes along with the word HIV. So it's always my pleasure to, you know, have these conversations.
Awesome. Now, I think we can possibly, my director, she just told me that Brandon was able to connect to the Wi-Fi. Let's try and see if we're able to get that work so we can have this reunion as a whole. Brandon, are you there?
Yeah.
There he goes.
That's okay.
Yes, I can hear you kind of clearly. Can you just have a whole sentence for us, Brandon? Yes. Yes, that works. Okay. So, guys, again, Brandon is first of all, guys, Brandon is on a plane. He's a YouTuber. He's joining us all the way from the air. He connected to the Wi-Fi, so we'll be able to hear and see him. He's a therapist that specializes in many things. One thing he does help is a lot of people within our LGBTQ community, those people who have HIV. He even does it in depression, anxiety, and even kinks and fetishes too. So I just want to say thank you, Brandon, for being here and also just giving your expertise as well, along with David. Can you hear me, Brandon?
No problem. Thanks for having me.
And you know what? It's okay. And if you cut off, Brandon, we know why. But we're just glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Also joining us is Mr. Roman Blk. Now, Roman is also part of the HIV community. He is a part of or participated in the BugChaser and also the BugChaser and also the GiftGiver community. It is a sexual fetish. It's an interesting topic. When I was talking to him, I was very intrigued. A lot of people say, I didn't know this part of the sub-community even existed. And for him to come on and to talk about this and to talk about it from a human standpoint of giving us understanding of what it means to have a certain type of sexual desire, I thought it was very brave. And I was like, oh my God, thank you so much for using my platform, Roman, to speak your truth, to give us understanding, and to make sure more of us start to be a little more unbiased. So joining us is Mr. Roman Blk, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, Roman, what's up, man?
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing. I know I spoke to you beforehand, Nigel. This is I love speaking my truth. But it's also one of those spaces where I've gotten a lot of threats, and I've had my life threatened for speaking my truth. So please excuse me if I'm a little shaky, if I'm not quite as articulate as some people may see me in the past. This is the second time I've really talked about this topic on a live platform. I love doing it, and it's scary. So thank you.
And thank you, Roman. And you're around some people who are here for you. You're around Terry, you're around David. And I just want you to lean on us during this time. And like I said, if for both Terry and for Roman's sake, keep your negative comments out of here. It's not welcome. This is a place where people feel safe, for us to have understanding, and for us to respect one another and to learn more about the LGBT community, the HIV community, and us as African American men going through this virus as a whole. And my show was just created just to give that understanding, not to judge anyone, but to give understanding and perspective. To start off, before we start both Terry and Roman, we're going to go to a quick break, but I'm excited to get back. But guys, when we come back, we're going to start with Terry Dyer about his story in dealing with HIV. We'll be right back.
It's time to step up, prep up.
Step up, prep up.
To help keep you free from the risk of HIV.
From the makers of Truvada, there's another PrEP option, Descovy for PrEP, a once-daily prescription medicine that helps lower the chances of getting HIV through sex. It's not for everyone. Descovy for PrEP has not been studied in people assigned female at birth. Talk to your doctor to find out if it's right for you.
Step up for health and body.
Prep up for your one and only love, or many loves. For kings, this queen, and you royals in between. For my now.
Our now.
And my future.
Our future.
Step up, prep up. Descovy is another way to prep. Descovy does not prevent other sexually transmitted infections, so it's important to use safer sex practices and get tested regularly. You must be HIV negative to take Descovy for PrEP, so you need to get tested for HIV immediately before and at least every 3 months while taking it. If you think you were exposed to HIV or have flu-like symptoms, tell your doctor right away. They may check to confirm you are still HIV negative. Serious side effects can occur, including kidney problems and kidney failure. Rare life-threatening side effects include a buildup of lactic acid and liver problems. The most common side effect was diarrhea. Tell your doctor about all the medicines and supplements you take, or if you have kidney or liver problems, including hepatitis. If you have hepatitis B, do not stop taking Descovy without talking to your doctor. Ask your doctor about your risk of HIV, and if Descovy for PrEP is right for you.
Words are loud, but actions are louder.
Step up,
Prep up.
With Descovy for PrEP.
Get help paying for Descovy for PrEP. Learn more at stepupprepup.com.
Rockstar disaster coming at you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Outspoken. Joining us is David, Terry, and Roman. David is my co-host / guest, and we're going to be really just talking to Terry and Roman about their experiences with HIV, both going through different experiences, and they're just going to be very upright, vulnerable with us, and I'm really excited. So we're going to jump right in, and we're going to start with Terry Dyer. Terry, first, just tell us, how long have you had HIV, and how old were you when you found out you were infected with HIV?
I found out in 2006 was when my first diagnosis was, and I was 26 years old at that time and in a 4-year committed relationship in San Francisco at that time.
Okay. And who infected you specifically? When you were in that relationship, was it your partner or was it from a previous occurrence?
It was definitely my partner, who ended up being my fiance during that 4-year relationship. Again, come to find out, it was all based off of a lie, but we thought we both were negative when we first started dating and continued to be that way, and obviously started to stop using protection at that time. And lo and behold, history years later, I became HIV positive.
Gotcha. And you said it was built up on a lie, Terry. How did you find out? Did he tell you? Did someone else tell you? Or did you have some type of intuition? Usually people, when they say, are you negative? You're negative and you're in a relationship, sometimes people are like, you know what, here's my paper to show proof.
Absolutely.
How did you?
Absolutely.
How did
You know, it's one of the things that David said earlier resonated with me and made me start to think about, what the two of us were dealing with and the conversations that we were or were not having at that time. We both were 26 and 27 years old and not thoroughly educated on, safe practices and navigating those types of relationship dynamics. And so we just, we're that couple that were out and about and in the community and athletes and was sort of the, one of the Castro it couples. And we thought we were young and invincible. And then, one night, a slip up, if you will. And 6 years later, one of his former best friends, who's actually one of my best friends now, sort of spilled the tea and blew the whistle on his secret, which was the fact that he actually found out that he was HIV positive the year before we started dating. So 2 years prior to myself becoming HIV positive is when he actually knew that he was positive himself and kept that secret from me throughout our entire relationship. And they, like many friendships, they had a falling out in 2012. And so as a result of that mutual friend said to him, listen, I've, sort of harbored this, deep, dark secret of yours for such a long time. And I'm now extremely close to the person that the secret is about. So, I don't like you no more. So I'm going to tell your tea. And that's exactly what he did in a very lengthy email and text messages. I woke up one morning in the summer of 2012 to all of these phone calls and voicemails and text messages and emails with the ex of mine at that time trying to do damage control and explained himself and things of that nature. So it was definitely a bit of a shock to feel as though I closed that chapter of my life, only to find out years later that was something that was the basis of my relationship with someone in my past. So that's in a nutshell sort of how the story went, and the rest is history.
Did you ever confront your ex-partner about the incident and about what your friend or what you guys' mutual friend told you?
We definitely had conversations that day. I think my immediate response to him was, listen, I can't talk to you right now over text. I need to process this. I need to talk to our mutual friend. I was also busy that day with work and other things. So let me process this and figure out, how do I move forward? How do I handle this piece of information? Because that was a pivotal point in my life. And then, wait a minute, he took away my right to choose because you lied from the start. So we ended up talking a few days later, and I really just listened to him at that time. Again, that was a very different time in 2012. A lot has happened in medicine and society and in my life and in his life. And so I definitely harbored, negative feelings toward him. I didn't forgive him at that time. And I let him know, I truly feel like you took away my right to make a conscious decision about how I moved and navigated in my relationship. And that's a tough pill to swallow. But eventually, I have, sort of done the work around not only forgiving him, but realizing I needed to forgive myself, because in reality, I was an adult and I was also making a conscious decision not to have protected sex with another individual. So I have to take ownership in that navigation as well. So to answer your question, we definitely spoke shortly after the whistle was blown, if you will.
Gotcha. So David, in hearing Terry's story, isn't that considered a crime?
Yeah, in a lot of states it is. So, what I often tell, my patients that I see who are living with HIV is I try to tell them, like, hey, you need to know the laws in your state. So, for instance, in the state of Georgia and in other states, it's considered a felony if you don't tell a sexual partner about what they define as like a communicable disease, quote unquote. And the thing is that those laws, those HIV criminalization laws, have been in play probably for like 25, 30 years, and they're based on the science from 25, 30 years ago. So they're not based, as Terry was talking about, you know, we've learned a lot, even since 2012, because that was the first year that PrEP was approved. So I think, you know, a lot has changed with that. But of course, in society, it's that thing where the medicine and the scientific advancements are there. But as far as a society, socially, we seem to be regressing in that case. And so that can be problematic. And so absolutely, it's one of those things where, like, depending on where, you know, Terry was living, I think you said living in California, it would depend on the state laws. Like, he could actually have taken his partner to court and sent him to jail for up to 20 years in some cases, depending on what state it's in.
Oh, wow. So Terry.
And I want to add, because even though Terry will say, like, hey, look, I was involved, this was a consensual relationship, it doesn't matter. If the person does not disclose up front, they are considered a part. And it doesn't even matter if it's anal sex, vaginal sex, or oral sex. Oral sex doesn't really transmit HIV. But even if it's just oral sex, people can be thrown in jail and prison because of that if they don't disclose their status to their sexual partners, even if they're undetectable. And for all the wonderful things we're saying about undetectable is untransmittable, and that if you're living with HIV and, you know, your viral load is, you know, less than 20, you're undetectable, the state laws don't recognize that. So they're still going to be going by the archaic laws that were created back in the 80s and the 90s.
Oh, wow. So a lot of stuff hasn't even been updated.
Right. Oh, hell no. And there's I want to say that there are a lot of people in all these states, a lot of policymakers that are really looking to change that position, to acknowledge the fact that it takes two people for HIV transmission to happen. So the glory of undetectable is untransmittable is that it gives power to people living with HIV to say, you know what, if I'm on my meds and I'm undetectable, I can't transmit this to you. And that's safety for you. People living with HIV shouldn't carry the whole burden, because when you have a consensual sexual act, both parties are responsible. And so someone who knowingly had condomless sex with someone and not knowing their HIV status, not having their conversation, you don't really have full legs to stand on to turn around and say, oh, it's your fault that you didn't tell me, because you actually engaged in that behavior yourself. And that's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. And I'm sure Terry can speak about kind of how he went through that, because I'm sure it was difficult at that time to kind of process that, where you're saying, like, you want to blame him, but also you realize that, you know what, I am grown and I did make this choice myself. So what does that mean? That's a hard pill to swallow.
Terry, which one was harder? Finding out that you were HIV positive, or finding out that you were betrayed by someone you thought truly loved you and you know, lied to you?
Sure. One of the things I want to go back as well, because I think we're missing, you know, a big piece here. And I do talk about this at great length in my book. So I received a phone call from him months prior to me testing, seroconverting essentially. And he, you know, sort of was crying on the phone and told me this whole sob story about he, you know, had just found out that he was positive, and he's really sorry. And he understands that if I don't want to see him anymore, we had been together for, you know, almost a full year at that point. And so, of course, I ran to his aid and said, that's okay, we'll get through this together. And then a couple of months later, I find out that I'm positive. So it was really you know, I knew, and I was already sort of being there for him mentally and emotionally. Also at that time, I was working in prevention, so I knew the space incredibly well. But I realized at that time that we weren't still doing the best practices and the safest practices at that time. And like David said, and I sort of alluded to earlier, that was something I had to take ownership in and not fully blame him. I will tell you that there's been times over the years where I think about it, and, you know, writing the book, of course, you know, I got a little angry and realized, you know, like, you knowingly went into a relationship with someone that you claim to love and be in love and wanting to spend the rest of your life with. You knowingly lied to that person. I have a hard time with people not allowing people the opportunity to make decisions for themselves and make decisions around their health and their lives and things of that nature. So for me, I've sort of held that for many years against him. And it's a really sort of tough situation to be in. You get angry, you get depressed, you go through all of the emotions around it. But like David said, it is ultimately that person's responsibility.
Can I say something right quick, Nigel? And I want to acknowledge this to Terry, because I think people don't realize this. Because when someone is exposed to HIV and learns that they are living with HIV, there's a lot of the blame game going around. It's completely understandable, and the things can exist at the same time, that Terry can hold himself accountable for his own behaviors, but yet what his partner did was manipulative and duplicitous as fuck. Let's be clear about that. And so, Terry, yes, you can take responsibility, but the fact that if you asked him and he didn't tell you and he lied to you up front, that's part of the thing. And I know Roman's going to talk about this in a while, but that kind of transparency when you go into things is very healing and can help facilitate your sexual health and kind of a good sexual and emotional relationship with somebody. So Terry, you can absolutely claim responsibility, but you also, as you hold yourself accountable, that partner, your ex, has to hold themselves accountable for what they did. It's not just about telling or not telling. It's about being accountable that you were manipulative and lied. That's what it's all about. And so the two things can exist at the same time. So you typically get people into camps that say, well, the people that are negative and then they turn positive, they have to take accountability for themselves. And they try to say that the person who's living with HIV has no accountability. I'm a firm believer that both parties have accountability. So let's be clear that both can exist at the same time.
Oh, wow, David. And I've never really thought about it from the accountability standpoint at all.
Be accountable for your shit. Everyone has to be accountable for their own shit. You can't be negative and just blame the positive person, and you can't be positive and just blame the negative person. Everyone has to hold a certain level of accountability. And once you acknowledge that and recognize that to that partner, and you understand where they're coming from, that's where the healing starts.
So Terry, to go back to my question, after finding out all of that, he did the crying thing, and then you knowingly, after he told you he was positive, and then you guys still didn't always have the protected sex that you had.
Right.
Which one hurt? Finding out you were HIV positive because you saw what it went through him, what he was going through, and he was crying, or finding out those years later and then seeing those texts and hearing that phone call from a friend, hey, he had it before he even met you and knew.
Right. I think it's really interesting, being in a space of prevention world and working in that space. There's a lot of things that you deal with, and you sort of put yourself in that space where people come to you and are looking at you for education and advice. And, as David knows, we were doing a tremendous amount of work in the San Francisco Castro community around stigma, around education on prevention and getting people into healthcare if they had transitioned into being positive and things of that nature. So I think for me, I was in a space of that's okay. That's okay. Just because I'm positive, it does not mean that this is the death sentence that it used to be, years ago. I still need to be there for him and sort of I took the responsibility of holding that. That's okay. We'll get through this together approach versus doing the true deep work around what was my own psyche around seroconverting. And it really, again, I think opened up, Pandora's box for me way back in 2007 when I found out that, everything was indeed a lie. I think that's when I actually had to start doing the work around my own status and what that meant. Even though I had been positive for 6 years, it still wasn't a huge deal to me. It still wasn't a huge part of my life. I was not on any type of medication for the first 5 years after I seroconverted, simply because my viral load and all my numbers were so incredibly good that at that time, doctors were not pushing medication on patients. Obviously, that has since changed. And I immediately got on medication once that approach did change from a medical standpoint. So I think in that moment of getting on medication, that also was a time in my life where I had to sort of come out again and then come out as HIV positive, right? I now have to deal with this mentally and emotionally. What does this mean? I have to take a pill every single day now. So, oh, wait, and then this person did it to me. Oh, wait, 2 years later, now it's a lie, you know? So you go through a myriad of emotions at that time, at those times. But I think for me, it was more so that he lied versus, you know, me actually becoming HIV positive.
And now, Terry, even in your book, you talk about you knew at one of an occurrence that took place between you and a partner that you were positive.
Yeah.
I'm just going to read a quick excerpt because, you know, we want people to buy the book. We want you to we don't want to give all of it away. But she
right.
She said, it was almost as though he and I were playing with borrowed time, which is actually what we are all doing in life. In my opinion, life is not guaranteed to anyone. We must enjoy, cherish, and live it to the fullest each day. I remember waking up New Year's Day, completely hungover as my eyes tried to adjust to the morning light. I looked around the room, grabbing my head in pain. The bedroom appeared to have been hit by a roaring Tasmanian devil, clothes thrown everywhere. However, what I did not see were any condoms around the room. A sinking feeling came over me at that moment, but I knew there was nothing I can do except see a doctor. Why that moment? Why do you feel that moment you knew you were HIV positive?
You know, a lot of times, you know, as I know a lot of people watching can probably attest to this, you know, the whole drunken sex thing, especially on a New Year's, you know, a big holiday like that. You know, we did the whole thing. It's sort of funny. Our condo at that time, sitting in the heart of Castro, was sort of known as the party house. Everyone would pregame, you know, at our place. And we definitely went hard that year. So in 2006. And I just knew once I woke up that morning, and then in that moment that I'm describing in the book, there was just this feeling that came over me that this is it. This is it. We had been fairly careful leading up to that. And again, that was a short period of time where he actually admitted that he was positive, or his story was that he was positive, or he had just found out in that moment. There was a very short period of time between that omission from him versus the time that you were speaking about in the book. So for me, something just told me, this is it. You're going to have to deal with it, but don't sort of let him see that I was going to have an emotional reaction to it, because you're still being there for him. You know, I've always been sort of one of those people that have put sort of my own stuff to the side in order to take care of the community and take care of those around me. And that moment was definitely no different.
Oh, wow. Awesome. So, Dr. David, we're gonna call you David, when you have seen patients who have told you that they were HIV, what were the myriad of emotions that you have seen over the course of time?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of emotions that people will have. There's some people, I've had to, you know, tell a lot of people that their test came back positive and that they're now living with HIV. And it ranges from someone who's like, okay, and it's very business-like. What do I need to do now? When am I going on meds? XYZ. Like, they literally lay it down like that. There are other people that completely lose it emotionally and can't talk and won't hear a word that you say. And so you have to be prepared for everything. You should have social workers, case managers, mental health counselors available for that at that time, because typically it happens within a busy clinic schedule or at a community-based organization when people find out, and you need support for someone because you never know how they're going to react. I do want to say one thing, going back to what Terry was talking about earlier. I think communication is the key when we talk about this between people who are living with HIV and people who are not living with HIV. I think the person who's living with HIV and the knee-jerk response when they give HIV to their partner and the partner does not know, it's like Terry said, it's beyond just the HIV diagnosis. It's about a thing of love and trust and betrayal. So you have to step out of your own shoes and say, okay, oh my God, this person really trusted me and I just betrayed that by not telling them about my status. That's probably where they're coming from, or one angle from when they're coming from. And likewise, the person who is HIV negative has to step out of their own shoes and say, what is it like for someone who is living with HIV? The stigma, the fear that you're going to be rejected, the fear that your life expectancy is going to be cut short, the fear that you're going to be criminalized and perhaps thrown in jail. All those things, you have to step out in your privileged HIV negative bubble and say, what is this person going through and why wouldn't they tell me? And maybe they weren't thinking first and foremost about the betrayal, but they were in survival mode. And they were thinking to themselves, I don't want to be rejected. I don't want to be stigmatized. I don't want to be hurt any more than I have. And particularly for those of us that are Black, that are same gender loving, that are among the gender identity continuum, we don't want that additional trauma put on us. And so someone who is not living with HIV needs to understand the stigma that still exists with HIV that would prevent someone from disclosing to someone else, even though they may love them profoundly. And so I think that's a hard thing to do. But in these conversations between someone who is living with HIV and someone who's not living with HIV, it literally is the cliche that you have to take yourself out of your own shoes and walk a mile in that other person's shoes to try to understand where they're coming from before you knee jerk and just get mad and say, okay, they did me wrong, or they didn't do this. Or the person living with HIV says, well, it's your fault too, because you didn't ask me and you didn't object when we didn't use condoms. We have to step out of that trauma-induced psyche and actually have a conversation where we can listen and understand each other's perspectives.
And Terry, you want to add on to what he was saying?
I do. I think that's so, I just want to reiterate what he's saying too. That's so incredibly important to know that what a person goes through once something like this occurs with them. You know, in my specific situation, one of the things that I ended up having to deal with is exactly what David is talking about. Being told by people, and you know, yes, at that time I lived in San Francisco, still in Castro district. I heard numerous times from people, "Oh, you're damaged goods now. Oh, wait, you're HIV positive. Like I don't do that with people, or I don't date people that has that status. I could never take that type of person home." Like these are the crazy things that people experience once they become HIV positive. And it doesn't need to be that way. People can have their opinions, their preferences, or whatever. But when you say those sort of hurtful and damaging things, I don't think people understand the magnitude of what they're doing to that other person. I had, people that I've been around for years that have struggled with mental disorder. They've struggled with depression. I have had a few moments of my lifetime where I have also dealt with depression and suicide, and talking with people on a regular basis about these sorts of things. That's one of the biggest things that I hear from people over and over and over again, is that they have always felt like people do not understand how their words have had such a negative effect on their outlook of themselves as they're continuing to try to deal with their new status or get beyond that stigma, figure out how to navigate dating and having sexual partners now that they're HIV positive. Words hurt. Words hurt. And I think that is such an incredible thing for us to constantly remember. Doesn't matter how smart a person is, doesn't matter how much work they've done around life and who they are, words still hurt people. And I think we've got to do better. We have to continue to have conversations like we're having right now to break down those barriers.
Oh, wow. Terry, David, thank you. Okay, guys, we're going to go to a quick commercial, but when we come back, we're going to be talking to Roman Blk about his story with dealing with HIV and also the subculture which he is within the HIV community. We'll be right back.
For people living with HIV, keep being you and ask your doctor about Biktarvy. Biktarvy is a complete one-pill, once-a-day treatment used for HIV in certain adults. It's not a cure, but with one small pill, Biktarvy fights HIV to help you get to and stay undetectable. That's when the amount of virus is so low, it cannot be measured by a lab test. Research shows people who take HIV treatment every day and get to and stay undetectable can no longer transmit HIV through sex.
Serious side effects can occur, including kidney problems and kidney failure. Rare, life-threatening side effects include a buildup of lactic acid and liver problems. Do not take Biktarvy if you take dofetilide or rifampin. Tell your doctor about all the medicines and supplements you take if you are pregnant or breastfeeding, or if you have kidney or liver problems, including hepatitis. If you have hepatitis B, do not stop taking Biktarvy without talking to your doctor. Common side effects were diarrhea, nausea, and headache.
If you're living with HIV, keep loving who you are and ask your doctor if Biktarvy is right for you.
Lifestyle disaster coming at you.
Welcome, everybody. Joining us is Roman, Terry, and David for another episode of Outspoken. We're talking about life with HIV. We just got through talking with Terry Dyer, who was telling his incredible story from his book, Letters to a Black Gay Boy, which I truly love, Terry. And I wish I could have you on again to talk about the book. It was a page there when I was going back through the notes. I was like, oh my goodness, I remember why I liked it so much. But now we're going to be hearing from Mr. Roman. Roman, welcome to the show.
Hello. And it's Mix, actually. So not to correct you, but I'm not Mr. or Miss, it's Mix. So it's MX.
MX, Mix.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep,
Awesome.
so I identify as non-binary.
Get me together, Roman, please. I want to make sure I identify everybody however they want. And I just want to say thank you, Roman, for being here. Thank you because you didn't have to. You really didn't have to come onto our show to talk about your likes, to talk about your desires, to talk about the things that makes you unique, that sets you apart. And you're giving so many people understanding, and you're making more people unbiased by doing this. And I just want you to know that David and Terry, we're here, and we're just gonna talk, and we're gonna just do our best do the best that we can to support your story. So I'm really, really excited.
I love being here, and I'm appreciative of y'all and the sermon y'all gave right before this. Listen, it got me together real quick, so thank y'all. And
wasn't it like a whole preaching duo?
Listen, I was going to church. I was over here snapping.
Okay, Roman. So you are HIV positive, correct?
Yes.
Yes. When did you find out you were HIV positive?
So I unofficially knew that I was HIV positive, what was it, August when I was 21. So it was 2014. So August of 2014, I got a call from the health department because about a month prior, I went to go donate plasma. And then I started getting calls like 2 weeks after, like, you need to come in and get tested. And I was like, I think I might be positive. And then come March of 2015 is when I had the cojones, if you will, to actually go in and get the official test and the official diagnosis of I had a reactive test. And that's when as Dr. David said earlier, some people come in and they're like, okay, we're going to do A, B, and C. And I very much went in March because I was ready and mentally ready at that time to say, okay, we're going to do A, B, and C. What are we going on? When? All that good stuff.
Gotcha. And were you surprised by the result that you had, Roman?
No, not even a little bit. So again, I had known, or I had this inclination that I was positive when I started getting those calls from the health departments like July or so. But I had not been using condoms. I chosen to not use condoms in terms of penetration since I was 18. And at that time I was already 21. So that's 4 years. I don't know time. But there was a couple of years. And I had been struggling with my own substance abuse issues, my own mental health. I've been living with depression and CPTSD for many years. So at that point in time, I would say that I was actively seeking it out. I had already attempted to commit suicide several times prior to that. So when I was looking around at the community that I was involved in, which were other substance users, other individuals that weren't necessarily on medication, they didn't know their status, they were just trying to survive. I was like, I don't really care what happens to me. And they didn't either. So just being in that community, it didn't surprise me when I became positive.
Gotcha. So with that community, what would you, is this the identification of this community? I'm just asking, HIV community called the BugChasers and also the GiftGivers.
Yes and no. So there is a slight difference, right? So for myself, I now identify as a prior bug chaser. But also with that same effect, it was like unbeknownst to me. So I didn't know I was specifically chasing after HIV. I just didn't have any care for my own life. I didn't care what happened to me. And now the older I get, the more involved I get within HIV advocacy. And the closer I get to getting involved with fetishes and kinks, the more I understand the fetish and the kink behind gift giving. So like myself, I am undetectable, but I do play up the role of gift giving. So if I have an individual who is chasing per se, I won't necessarily tell them my status, because it's this taboo of, the difference is it's a taboo of you want to do the thing that you're told not to do. It's like when you're a kid and you put the fork in a electrical socket, and mom's like, hey, don't put that fork in there. And you're like, okay, whatever. You're gonna keep doing it until something bad happens. Sometimes some kids are just gonna keep doing it even after something bad happens. And we're just the kids that keep doing it even after something bad happens.
When did you know that it was a sexual turn on for you, that, you know, of the possibility of, you know, back when you were young and you didn't care?
So I knew, oh God, probably about 4 years ago. So I'm 28 now. I really started to understand that it was a turn on for me. Just this idea of being taboo and doing what I'm not supposed to be doing. About 4 years ago. So when I was about 24.
Gotcha. And in that community, how do you find people within the community? Is it through websites? Was it through online? Is it a place that you guys meet up at Starbucks for coffee? How do you go out and say, hey, I'm into this, and comfortably say it to someone and know that they're into it as well?
Absolutely. So because of my experience with online communities, I'm not going to specifically tell anybody any sites. Again, I told you prior to this conversation, I'd received death threats in the past for telling this story, and for, you know, living my truth. And I'm gonna just keep everything like that private. However, to just generalize it, there are websites that people can go to. Craigslist is a really big one, but you're not gonna be able to find those specific posts. So I'm fine with y'all going to Craigslist. And there's a lot of, I'm not gonna say there's a lot of events, but there are specific events individuals can go to. Or let's take flagging. So in the leather community, people will flag various colors that show various things. And bug chasing and gift giving is not a specific thing that they'll flag. But there's variance around that.
Gotcha. I have my fetishes. I have my kinks. And I think one of the first things that came, I asked my therapist when I was like, oh, this is kind of weird. Like, I was like, am I doing something wrong? Or is something wrong with me? Did that ever cross your mind when you found out at age 24?
It didn't cross my mind. It didn't cross my mind until I started talking about it. It didn't cross my mind until I started to become an advocate, honestly. And then as I was starting to advocate for, you know, individuals living with HIV, but not just living with HIV, individuals becoming virally suppressed and still living their fetishes, advocating for sexual health toolkits in general, you know, non-penetrative sexual practices, I started to think it was wrong to be advocating for this community while still loving this fetish, and still while still, you know, engaging in this idea or engaging in this fetish. That was the contradiction for me. I never thought that specific thing was wrong. I thought my advocacy was incorrect. Like, I couldn't be an advocate if I was a person who enjoyed this specific fetish. Until now, I mean, just in the last year, where I've learned how to have a different conversation around it, which is non-penetrative sexual health practices.
Gotcha. And David, I want to ask you, and you can say no if you haven't, have you came across any patients or anyone who say, hey, I do want to be safe, I want to do this and I want to do that, but my fantasies, my kinks, I have to fulfill those. How do I have that balance? Do you ever talk to them, David, and like what it means to have that balance and understanding that balance and doing it in a safe way?
I mean, it's hard in the clinical setting, you know, when they're giving us 15 to 20 minutes to see folks. It's hard to delve into all that. I've had conversations with friends, obviously, and you know, when Roman was talking about the fantasy part of it, the immediate parallel I thought about, and it's not the same, so I don't want anyone to be like, man, it's not the same. It's a bad analogy, but I look at it the same way when people, and this is, let's be clear, this is all about sexual health and pleasure. And that's one of the conversation that gets missing when we talk about STIs and HIV. In America, we always tend to pathologize anything that's around sex instead of starting first with the pleasure aspect of it. Yep. So when Roman was talking about, yeah, I could be undetectable and I'm not going to tell this person my status and we still going to have this sex and live in that fantasy. I also thought about the way a lot of people who bottom will call their ass a pussy, knowing their ass ain't a pussy. And then they'll say, oh, I'm coming out my ass and I'm coming and you making my pussy come. And I'm thinking to myself, and people actually believe that there's coming out of their ass. And I'm like, anatomically, no, that's probably lube and sweat and juices and all kinds of other stuff. But again, you don't want to basically douse somebody's fantasy. Let somebody have that fantasy. And if their fantasy is that their role is of the traditional kind of cisgendered woman who has a pussy and can actually come from her clitoris, and you want to involve that fantasy because that gets you and the person you're having sex with off, go ahead and do that. So I think when we're talking about this stuff, and when Roman said that, I immediately thought of that parallel because it is a lot about the fantasy. It is about a lot about the fetish. It is a lot about sexual health. And there's not a whole lot of people that are out there. I think that balance that you have to strike that Roman eloquently talked about is that, you know, you have to say, well, okay, I want to be healthy. So I want to be undetectable and live my best life. But then you have people that are saying like, hey, I want you to give me HIV. I want, you know, I'm a bug chaser. I want to get this from you. Like, breed me, daddy, do all this other stuff. And you're living that fantasy too. But are you going to sacrifice your own personal health and life in order to fulfill that other person's fantasy? Probably not. So what can you do? You can still be undetectable and take care of yourself and then still involve in the fantasy that gets both y'all off. And guess who gets hurt? Nobody in that situation. Everybody ends up pretty much okay. So when Roman was talking about that, that immediately is what I was thinking of.
No, and absolutely. I mean, that's a very good like a tie-in. Yeah. And something I didn't mention, like, I actually have conversations with individuals, or I have conversations with other chasers who are like, breed me, daddy. And for as feminine as I am, I'm like, you want me to top? Sure, I'll be a power top, because we all know I'm not. However, when I have to be a power top, you know what? The coins come. So if I'm gonna make my coin, I'm gonna make my coin. So when I'm doing those things, I'll have a conversation with them, and I'll ask them what's within their sexual toolkit. I'll ask them necessarily what's their status. And once we have that conversation, it's a quick 30-second conversation, and then bye, we never have that conversation again. But we have that for my peace of mind, their peace of mind, and then we continue to live in the fantasy. So yeah.
That's so healthy from a sexual perspective. Like, and people don't always think about that, but that kind of communication, that kind of transparency, like letting people know what turns you on, what doesn't turn you on, and then just going and enjoy it and just living in the fantasy. That's a beautiful thing. And we don't talk about sex as pleasure as much as we should.
Oh, I do. I'll have pleasurable sex all day.
That's right.
And David, going back to what you said with Terry, it's consensual. what took place. This is an act of being consensual. You both know where you stand. You have an understanding, and it's way better than being lied to and not expressing your status.
I think the other thing too, what's coming to mind for me, especially when David just gave us that lesson right there a moment ago, I think one of the things that is so incredibly interesting is I always joke with folks, but there's some truth in this. For me, it's like, let's have grown folk conversation, which means I'm going to have grown folk sex, right? Mm-hmm. That means to me, if for those that, can relate to this or remember that song Red Light Special by TLC? Like, that's right. Like, I'm getting ready to take you there. Like, I'm getting ready to have that conversation with you to get you in the mood, to make you feel like this is something sexy, this is something hot, this is something fun. Let's make it what we want to make it, but we're also going to throw in those elements of, okay, well, this is healthy, this is not healthy, or whatever. And then you don't even realize that you just actually had that conversation around the health aspect of sex and what you're into. That, to me, is what grown people do. That, to me, is how you stand in your own truth. You stand in your, I'm comfortable with my sexuality, my sensuality. I'm going to let you know. And boo, if you're not on that same level, that same page, then maybe we're not meant to be in this moment to have that grown folk talk, to have that grown folk type of sex.
Yeah, right. And I agree that we come from a judgmental society. There's a lot of times where you see a lot of straight men when they're having sex with women, call me daddy. Who's your daddy? I mean, that's weird. I mean, when some people think that that's weird that you're having sex with somebody you want to call your father. I mean, what is the difference? When do we normalize that? And who comes up with what sexual speak or what sexual talk is better than the next? So I will say that is so, I'm proud of you, Roman. I'm proud of you for really, really speaking your truth. Now, Roman, I would love to ask you this. Yeah. How are you handling the backlash with when you first did your interview with the first person, told people of your likes, you said there have been death threats. There have been people coming after you because of what you like. And let me be clear, this is consensual sex and they're adults, and these are other adults who are doing these sexual things consensually, and they're grown, and it's not against the law. It's against the law in certain states if they did it and no one knew, yes, but this is not against the law. But you doing something that's totally legal as an adult with other consenting adults, but you're still getting that backlash as a human being, having death threats, having those fears, being scared. How are you dealing with that as an individual?
So now I'm a lot better, right? So let me break it down like this. So the first time I really expressed my journey, really expressed my truth on being a bug chaser, I was approached by an individual who wanted to hear my story or wanted to hear my journey. And I didn't do the background check. I didn't quite, look into their other interviews. So I didn't understand what they were really asking me for. As I was in the interview and I was getting questioned, I was often stopped mid-sentence or mid-explanation or mid-journey for them to ask me another question or for them to almost attack me. And that was, I want to say, about 2 years ago when that interview took place. And the backlash from that has put me off from doing a lot of, interviews like this, has put me off from being as outspoken as I would have been. That was like at the height of my advocacy, if you will. And that specific interview really just was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't be in this space anymore. And it's taken me a long time. I mean, this is almost 2 years later. It's taken me this long for me to not only learn the verbiage to speak my truth, but to come to terms with what it is that I was doing, what it is that I'm doing currently, what it is that I did, and how I wanted to portray that. If any of that made sense. I know I speak a lot in riddles.
Yes, it makes total sense. Now, Terry, I do have a question for you, and it does relate to also the chasers and the gifter community. Now, I know there are some people who are HIV positive who became positive and they didn't want it. And some people were raped. Some people, like you, they were lied to. Let's say even before you did give consent. After finding out later on, some people went through some hard times. Now, some people might look at Roman and say, "Hey, it's crazy that these people have a fantasy about it, but we didn't want it," and sometimes they might feel offended or hurt. What are your words as being an HIV person who went through it in a way and you didn't want to receive it in the way that you got and you felt betrayed? What is your way of talking to them to have them have a better understanding in respecting this mixed person in his choice and what he's doing, and not to be angry at him or his acts, but still push advocacy?
Sure. Great question. I think it's sort of twofold for me, right? I have experience, and when I posted a lot of the media and the promos about tonight's conversation, I received a lot of messages, a lot of text messages, a few phone calls, and some DMs on Facebook Messenger where people were like, "Wait, you're going to be a part of this? Like, how could you be a part of this? That person is saying this, and then wait, are you saying this?" So there was a little bit of confusion, and it made me sort of say, okay, before you get on this or in this conversation tonight, you're really going to have to, kind of take a few moments and think about your stance and your position in this. Here's what I say. It's sort of, again, a two-prong for me. The first prong is, have I experienced folks asking me specifically on some of the apps and the sites and things like that, oh, wait, your status says that you're HIV positive. I want you to give me this. I want you to do this. And I want you to do that. Every moment, in my opinion, is an educational opportunity. So every single time that I've experienced that with someone who's wanted that or asked that of me, you better believe they got a mouthful of, wait, what? What? Here's how I'm going to educate you. Here's how I want you to think about what this actually means and what having this disease means and what this looks like, the stigma that comes around that. Am I condemning them? Am I whatever? Absolutely not, because that's a grown folks' choice. You are making a conscious decision to have that as your approach. Who am I? I'm no judge and jury. That's on you. You're going to have to answer that to that at that point in time, or when the time comes for you. The second thing is would I be a person that would ever do that? Absolutely not. Just not how I like to get down. And is there, the fantasy around it and the excitement and all that kind of stuff? Sure. Let's be real. Like, we all, like, that's just the way that it goes, right? Let's call a spade a spade. But that doesn't mean that I have to partake, and that doesn't mean that I have to knowingly, willingly go and give somebody something that, to me, they may not have the full grasp of what that means. So that's sort of my take on it. I hope that really does answer your question, because I think it's so incredibly important to understand both parts of it. I also want to commend Roman, because I think it does take an incredible amount of strength and courage to step out and say something that goes against what our society generally says or does or how we operate. So I commend you for that. And thank you for sharing before we came on air. Thank you for sharing what you shared with both David and myself, because I immediately thought to myself, okay, this brother needs me to be here for him in this conversation.
Yeah.
Like, you're still doing some work around that. And as another gay Black man, the one thing that I will never do is try to bring you down because we have a difference of opinion. What I'm going to let you know is I might disagree wholeheartedly, but that doesn't mean that I'm getting ready to not support you, because at the end of the day, you are my brother. You are another Black gay man. So it is my duty and my responsibility to make sure that I support you and that I make sure that you know that your life is just as valuable like the rest of ours.
Amen.
Fair.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I told you she's gonna preach again. Look,
I
sorry.
Terry, we need to change.
Come on.
We need to change the name from Terry Dyer author to Pastor Terry Dyer.
Sorry, y'all.
The good Reverend Doctor Terry Dyer.
All right, guys. We're at the final few minutes. I just want to ask Terry and Roman one last question before we end. Terry, what has this journey, when you first, from finding out that you were positive to now, what has that journey of being diagnosed of HIV really meant to you, and what did you learn from it?
I think that's a very interesting question. David had mentioned earlier that when folks sometimes come out to or find out that they're HIV positive when he's seeing his patients, that sometimes they're very businesslike. I do have a huge corporate background in my career, and I also noticed that in addition to me remembering that I wanted to be there for my ex-partner at that time, I definitely went through it in a very business-like, well, can't do nothing about it. It's time to move forward. It's time to continue to educate and be there for the rest of the folks in the community that I serve. So once again, sort of put yourself to the side. It's not about you. Continue to allow your life to be a vessel for those others that don't have the strength to speak up and deal with this situation themselves. Let's go and help those folks. So I also, one of the things that a lot of people don't know about me is I've had to deal with other health issues, more so than this. I've actually had to battle cancer a couple of times. And the last time I went through that was in December of 2018. So that we as a society have to constantly deal with other life-threatening issues. Is there a cure now for HIV? Absolutely not. But we have come so far from where we used to be. So for me, it's like, let's go deal with the ones that we can't really control, that people are dying from every single day. That's where I am now, and how I've sort of been able to deal with the fact that I did become HIV positive. That's okay, but that's okay. That's a part of life. It doesn't define who I am. It doesn't, make me look at life, or I look at things differently. In 2010, I received an award from Pause Health magazine as their African American Person of the Month for the work that we were doing in San Francisco Bay Area around these sorts of issues. And one of the things that I had to do is I had to come out all over again in this magazine as being HIV positive. That taught me a lot in that moment. It taught me that you, again, have a story to tell, and it's going to resonate with so many folks. So sure, you're HIV positive now, but there are far other and bigger issues and things that you need to help other folks deal with. So that's kind of what it's taught me.
Wow.
Terry, you reminded me of, I don't know if y'all have seen the Tina Turner documentary, but she said during it that after she went through that whole ordeal with Ike and had to leave him, all the physical, sexual, emotional abuse she endured. And then when she had to tell her story, and then even when she got on her own and did her own thing, people kept bringing her back to that story. Ooh, tell us about your trauma. And she was like, I lived this. This is not fun to rehash all the time. But it resonated with so many people that I think she had to learn how to do that. And Terry, as you were speaking, I was thinking about Tina Turner and what she went through with that. And it's the same thing, because there's a part of you that has to grieve over the life that you had before and then the life that is in the future. But you're grieving over the former you when you weren't living with HIV. Mm-hmm. And so I think that trauma gets redone when people want to celebrate you, when people want to honor you, when people want to interview you. You have to it's almost like ripping that scab off over and over again. But I think you realize that, the amount of people that you're going to reach, even in tonight's conversation, you're going to reach so many people and influence many people. It's going to be phenomenal. So, I applaud you, Terry, on, everything you're doing. I'm about to buy your damn book because I need to get it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And Roman, what has your journey been like since being diagnosed with HIV?
So first, I just want to thank you, Terry, for your vulnerability and your story and your words. You've been preaching this whole time, so thank you. Seriously, just bring on a sermon. I'm also going to just buy your book. It's that serious at this point. But my journey has, been different, or been up and down. So to make super long story very short, my journey has been my journey. I love kink, I love fetish, I love sex. And I have stepped away from doing any specific kind of advocacy work. While I'm grateful for this specific platform and while I'm thankful for being invited onto this platform, I stopped doing a lot of specific advocacy work in terms or around HIV or individuals living with HIV because I wanted to focus on sex. I wanted to have conversations that were about fetishes and about kinks. So now I do a lot more one-on-one conversations. So I'm a full-time escort. So I do a lot more one-on-one conversations with individuals about sexual health toolkits and about non-penetrative practices for their sexual health toolkit. So specifically about, how they can involve kink play to remain safe, how they can involve impact play, and what that fantasy looks like for bug chasing. And do they understand what it is to live with HIV? I just have those conversations one-on-one now instead of in any sort of bigger practice or on my social media. So that's what my life looks like since diagnosis. I've gone through the journey. I've handled the grief, if you will. I've changed names. I've identified as non-binary, and now I'm just living life.
And that's all you can ask for, man. That is all you can ask for. Okay, now, Roman, I'm going to start with you. Do you have anything coming up, any specials, any events, any more interviews, any books that you're thinking about writing? What is up next for Roman?
Nothing. Honestly, I'm just a person so I'm an escort. I love what I do for work. I love the fact that I am a sex worker. So if people want to find me, they can find me on Twitter. I'm Roman_Blk. You can also find my videos through there. Like, baby, I love what I do. And that's it.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. Terry, your book, A Letter to a Black Gay Boy. I already bought your book. I love your book. For anybody who where can we find it, Terry?
You can find the book on Amazon. Super easy to find. You can type in my name or, of course, type in the title there. You can also find it in certain Barnes and Nobles in South Florida, which I'm super excited about. You can also buy it on barnesandnoble.com. So either one.
Awesome. And Terry, do you have any more interviews? Terry, you're always busy. Like, I tried to get you for one of my You're like, we already agreed. And I was like, oh, Terry's booked. I got after COVID, his whole list. Like, you have to go through his agent and everything. Terry is
you are absolutely right. I'm joking all the time. People are like, do you sleep? I'm like, no, I don't. Maybe 4 or 5 hours a night, because I think it's just so incredibly important to continue having these types of conversations. So anytime someone reaches out to spearhead these and have me as a guest or on a panel discussion here, I work for a nonprofit here in South Florida, where we're providing mental health and social services for thousands and thousands of LGBTQ folks throughout the year. So, I've sort of become the face of that organization. So between that and book and, I'm sort of all over the place in a good way, of course.
Busy is good. Busy means money is on the way, right?
Well,
And David, you are an author as well. You have Standing on His Shoulders. I haven't read it yet, but soon I hope to do it. Hope that it's going to be a future read for mine.
Yes.
Tell me more about that, David.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I was just on Amazon kind of about to purchase. They were asking me to do a verification code to make sure I was the right person who was signing up when I was buying Terry's book. But I think similar to what Roman was just saying, those of us that are working in the HIV world, in the HIV field, it is a field where you can get burnt out very quickly because there's so much going on and it's so heavy on a lot of levels. So the book that I wrote was about my relationship with my father, and I had published that in 2015. And he was going through, it was a collection of stories that I had written before about lessons that I had learned growing up. And my father was an immigrant from Haiti. And I wrote the book to kind of go through therapy about dealing with, you know, some of the positive aspects of what he taught me, but also some of the not so great relationship aspects that we had, particularly when it came to my sexual orientation, and his not really being able to reconcile or accept it. And so I decided to write that book, just kind of talking about, you know, the complexity that is a human being and how you accept somebody, and your parents are flawed human beings and do that. So I wrote that and published it in 2015. I wanted to make sure he could read it and see it before he died. And actually, he died in 2020, so last year, January. And I'm actually in the process of writing a book about when he got sick, needed surgery, and I had to go home for about 10 months, to spend time with him and my mother. And then after he passed, my mother, to kind of help her deal with, you know, the house and kind of how she was going to transition her life moving forward. So I'm in the middle of writing a book about that right now, and about the experience of being an adult and going home to, you know, live with your elders and deal with their mortality and facing that. It's an interesting thing.
Oh, wow, David. And I will say, I don't know that many people were writing a book about that. And I was just thinking about that the other day. This year, my great grandfather passed. And we were just thinking, you know, these are people who were always there for us. Who was always there when somebody was in the hospital or somebody had going on with this. But as our grandparents or parents are getting older, things kind of change, and we have to be there for them. And I was just thinking about that with me and my mom. And I was like, wow, one day I'm probably going to have to take care of her, but I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah, I don't think anyone knows what it looks like. And I've seen a lot of books about what to do, like how to take care of our elders, of elderly parents and caretakers. And they always focus on the clinical stuff, but they don't focus on what it's like going through that. And so my book is about what it felt like going through that, having to go home to upstate New York, the dynamics between me and my parents, how that's changed. What happened after my father passed, and how my mother and I forged a different relationship as I got prepared to move her to California with my sister. And so all those things will be included in the book. And I think it'll resonate. Like Roman said, I think everything doesn't have to be about HIV. And so I wrote a book about my father relationship and what he taught me. One time I'm going to write a book about my parents. Those things are important, and people need to realize that whether you're living with HIV or whether you're not, we're all humans and we deal with the same shit. And so these are common human feelings and emotions and experiences that we all go through. So we need to talk about it and tell our own narratives, or else as Black gay men and Black queer people and Black people of diverse gender identities experience, people won't realize that we have lives beyond that, and that our sexual orientations and gender identities are not the only aspects of who we are.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much, David, Terry, and Roman, for joining me. It went a little bit over an hour, but that's because it was so good. So thank you for taking your time out with me to do this. I really appreciate it. David, I know you're glad that you ate now. So, you know.
I know, I can show you the plate. It was like chicken and rice. There's literally nothing left. And plus I got the red cup like Roman, so I washed it down with some Ciroc, Ciroc, mango and cranberry juice.
Wait, what? We drinking the same thing, David? I got Ciroc peach and orange juice.
In a red cup, you understand?
No less a red cup.
Oh, it's here. We're just over here just empty and dry.
Listen, I had dinner right before this also, which happened to be chicken and vegetables as well. But I was like, I didn't want to have my little big old gym mug because I just come from the gym. So I was like, I don't want to have that. So I got this little dainty cup from our kitchen. I was like, I don't want to have this on camera instead.
Go ahead, Terry.
I'm about to have a drink though. So.
This is a no judgment zone. You got this. Right. A no judgment zone.
Oh God. Okay, David, Terry, Roman, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Viewers, guys, thank you so much for tuning in and listening and watching. This was an incredible episode. I think it was one of the best that we ever had. We walked away and learned so much about each other, about different communities, about individuals as a whole. And I think this has just been wonderful. Make sure next week we're going to be taking a break from Outspoken, but the week after that, we're going to be coming back very strong. I'm going to do a 2-part series at the last 2 weeks of April. And it's going to be called Being a Part of the Divine Nine as an LGBTQ individual. Part 1 will have members from Alpha, Kappa, Sigma, Omega, and Iota. And Part 2 will have AKA, Delta, SG, Rho, and Zeta. And each one will tell about their experiences being online and also just after they crossed and being a part of their organizations and what that meant as an LGBTQ individual. So make sure you join us for those final 2 weeks of April for that. We're just really excited that we're going to continue just to move forward and just tell these stories and have these discussions that aren't out there. And if you are interested in giving us suggestions, giving us some help, becoming a guest, just email us at outspokenlgbtq@gmail.com. Again, thank you. I'm your host, Nigel Ashford, and I can't wait for you guys to see us again. And remember to stay outspoken. Thank you.